Barney, 39 at the time, and Betty Hill, 42, were an interracial couple living in Portsmouth, New Hampshire in 1961. Barney was a night shift United States postal worker, and Betty was a child welfare social worker. Outside of work, the free time they did have was spent in their church community and activities related to the civil rights movement. They attended a Unitarian congregation and were members of the NAACP. Barney sat on a local board of the United States Commission on Civil Rights. Barney decided the couple should take a road trip through Montreal and Niagara Falls as a much-needed break from their very busy lives. The decision was made so hastily that they had no time to make preparations and set off with just $70 in their pockets. On the last day of their trip, September 19th, they decided to drive through the night to beat an approaching storm. They stopped at a diner in Vermont to get some coffee and recharge. They left the diner around 10 p.m. and hoped to get home around 2 or 3 in the morning. Roughly 30 minutes later, while they were on the road, Betty spotted a bright light in the sky. At first she thought it was a shooting star, but it began to move erratically, then appeared to get bigger and brighter as if it was getting closer to them. Barney speculated it was just a satellite that went off course and was nothing to worry about, but as they drove, the light seemed to move with the car. They decided to stop at a roadside picnic area to let their dog walk around and to also get a better look at the light. Through binoculars, Betty saw that the light was actually an object spinning in the air. "Barney, if you think that's a satellite or a star, you're being completely ridiculous," Betty told her husband. Betty's sister had claimed to have seen a flying saucer a few years prior to this, and Betty began to think that that's what she was seeing. Barney started to grow concerned but didn't want to spook Betty, so they quickly got back in the car and continued to drive home. About 70 miles past the diner, the object descended towards them and hovered about 100 feet above their car. Barney stopped in the middle of the highway, grabbed his pistol, and exited the vehicle. He walked toward the craft. Looking through his binoculars, he claimed to have seen 8 to 11 humanoid figures peering at him through the craft's windows.
No, through the windows!
It's gotta feel so isolating at that moment, you know, like...
Yeah, I'd be pedal to the metal. Let's freaking go!
Speaking of which, Barney ran to the car and told Betty the craft was going to capture them, and he sped away. Or at least tried to.
Oh, no.
He got back in the car and sped away while Betty watched the craft out of the passenger window. They then heard a rhythmic series of beeping and buzzing and lost consciousness. A second series of beeping and buzzing returned them to consciousness, and they realized they had traveled about 35 miles down the road and a few hours had passed, with little recollection of their drive. Ufologists call this missing time, when you can't recall what happened between like 2 points of like traveling or whatever.
Yeah.
When they got home, they felt dirty and compelled to check their bodies. Their watches stopped working and the clothes they were wearing were damaged. So it's like they got into a scuffle and didn't even remember it.
Yeah, they don't remember anything.
Yeah, the only thing they remember was up until the point they started speeding away.
Yeah,
and everything.
And their clocks stopped, or their watches.
Yeah, they just stopped working.
Stopped on the exact minute that they were abducted.
Maybe so. In the days that followed, they reported the incident to the Air Force, but withholding the harder to believe parts, as to not be labeled eccentric. But their claims were dismissed. And the Air Force basically said they misidentified Jupiter in the sky. Like, it was just like a bright planet. And they thought it was a UFO. Later, Betty ended up contacting NICAP, or I guess NICAP. It's a civilian UFO research group. And so she contacted them and they interviewed them and believed them. But the Hills still couldn't remember what happened during the missing time. Betty was plagued with nightmares of the abduction and wanted to remember what happened, and Barney was suffering from anxiety from the incident, and he seemed to want to keep the memories repressed and put it behind him. In January of 1964, both Barney and Betty started a series of hypnosis sessions that lasted until June of the same year, because they were suffering so much from the anxiety and stress from, I guess, the incident. They finally decided to kind of see a psychiatrist, which then led them to undergo hypnosis, which was kind of a popular thing at the time. So they were hypnotized separately, so neither of them would be influenced by the other. And this is what they recalled during the hypnosis. Starting with Barney. Under hypnosis, his recollection of events leading up to the abduction were consistent with his conscious recollection. After he ran back to his car, he recalled driving away from the UFO, but had an irresistible urge to drive into the woods, so he did. He saw 6 men standing in the dirt road, and the car stalled. They told him not to fear them. He described the beings similar to Betty's hypnotic recollections when she was under hypnosis, so they kind of had the same description of the beings. The beings would stare into his eyes with a mesmerizing, terrifying effect. Barney stated, "Oh, those eyes. They're there in my brain. I was told to close my eyes because I saw 2 eyes coming close to mine, and I felt like the eyes had pushed into my eyes." Barney said they were taken to the craft and were separated. He was made to lay on a small exam table. He continued to keep his eyes closed for most of the exam out of fear. A cup-like device was placed over his genitals, and he believed a sperm sample may have been taken. The beings then scraped his skin and looked in his ears and mouth. A tube was inserted into his anus, he said.
You get probed. I
Yeah.
guess that's it's a common trope with aliens.
Oh, gosh. And it was quickly removed. They felt his spine and seemed to be counting his vertebrae. They spoke in a mumbling language he could not understand, and when they did communicate with him, it seemed to be through thought transference. At the end of the exam, they were escorted off the ship and taken to their car. Yeah, that does sound like mumbling.
And then translation. Don't worry about the thing in your butt.
Basically, like, during this whole time, like, or a few points in it, they just tell him, don't worry, you know, like, don't be afraid.
Right. Don't worry, it's cool. Like, we're gonna just look. There's some suction.
Like, we're doing this against your will, but it's all cool.
It's cool. A little sperm there.
Ew. Betty's hypnotic recollections were similar to the dream she had after the abduction, with a few differences. But Betty and Barney's hypnotic recollections were consistent with one another's. She was also made to lay on an exam table. They took strands of her hair, nail clippings, and scraped her skin. Each sample was placed on a clear glass-like material. A large needle was inserted into her abdomen, and she started to writhe in pain, but one of the beings waved his hand over her, and the pain stopped. After the exam, Betty had a small conversation with one of the beings, asking where they were from. It showed her a map of stars and pointed out where they came from. Later, she would make a drawing of it. Though it had many stars, she would just sketch the ones that stood out the most to her. After the hypnosis sessions concluded, the psychiatrist that performed them speculated that Barney's recollection of the abduction may have been a fantasy inspired by Betty's dreams. So their psychiatrist didn't really believe that it was an actual abduction, but the Hills disagreed with this, but believed that the hypnosis helped to alleviate their anxieties, and they went back to living their normal lives without all the stress and all that. So, like, it did, help them, even though their doctor was kind of dismissive.
Yeah.
So they were willing to talk about it with friends and family and the occasional UFO researcher, but did not seek out publicity. So, like, at the time, it didn't seem like they were even trying to seek out fame or attention from it. In 1966, John G. Fuller contacted the Hills and gained their cooperation to write a book about their experiences called The Interrupted Journey, which includes a copy of the star map Betty sketched. Barney died a few years later at the age of 46 from a cerebral hemorrhage, and Betty became a celebrity in the UFO community.
Oh, wow.
And died of cancer at the age of 85. There are many who dispute their claims, suggesting it was a shared hallucination from the stress of being an interracial couple, work, and sleep deprivation, but the Hills held their belief their whole lives.
I don't understand shared hallucination.
Yeah, that doesn't seem
sounds like
plausible.
Yeah, it seems less likely that it'd be a shared hallucination than anything that someone's saying actually happened,
Yeah.
Like shared hallucination.
Like,
why would
two
we
people
see
seeing
the
the
same
same-
thing? Yeah.
Obviously, y'all saw something.
Yeah.
But I don't know, unless, like, that's a nice way of saying y'all are just feeding off of each other and agreeing with each
Yeah.
other.
Yeah.